They silenced Earth, exiled humanity, and thought we would fade into forgotten dust, but exile became our forge. We returned not to destroy, but to teach the galaxy that memory is the sharpest weapon and contradiction the greatest strength. Now, even the architects of reality are listening, and we are the ones telling the story. When the Galactic Pact established its dominion over the known sectors, it promised three things: peace, unity, and progress. For most species, that promise meant order, a life without chaos, borders without war, and technology in slow, stable increments. For humanity, it meant something else. It meant containment. When Earth applied for inclusion in the Pact, it was already rebuilding from the Ash era. The global collapse that had scorched half the planet birthed the atmospheric refugee fleets and forced a generation into orbital survival domes. Humanity had crawled out of that with ingenuity, stubbornness, and an almost pathological refusal to vanish. But the Pact hadn't seen resilience. It saw volatility. They called it the Clause, a document only applied to a handful of species. It allowed conditional observer status, but no interstellar autonomy, no advanced tech sharing, and no capacity for armed deployment beyond Sol. Earth was admitted, but shackled. The Clause forced humanity into silence. No voice in Pact governance. No military presence. No colonization rights. Earth was allowed one station, Harmony, in neutral orbit around Zexus, a cultural exchange point far from any border conflict. It was a gesture, a leash with a ribbon. And for 30 years, humanity played by the rules. On the surface, in secret, they built. Station Harmony was both symbol and surveillance hub. The Pact designed it, oversaw its construction, and rotated in neutral observers every 4 months. Humanity staffed it with diplomats, artists, scientists, linguists, the brightest, the calmest, the ones least likely to spark concern. But beneath the public decks, where the corridors narrowed and the environmental temperature dropped, existed a space never logged in official records. A chamber, spherical and layered with magnetic shielding, accessible only through DNA-locked elevators. They called it the Black Room. Its purpose, to monitor, not just the Pact, but the edges, the anomalies, signals that shouldn't exist, civilizations that shouldn't move the way they did. And it was in this room that Dr. Elon Rhodes first heard the whisper. It came on a band buried under a known relay frequency, a trace pulse, oscillating in a rational rhythm. Not a message, not at first. Then came the patterns. 4 tones, always 4, repeating every 77 seconds. A language wrapped in silence. She brought it to Director Mason, the highest-ranking human on Harmony. He listened once, then twice, then 3 times, then ordered lockdown. "What is it?" Rhodes asked. Mason stared at the rotating spectrogram with a grim expression. "A distress signal," he said, "but not from one of ours. It's old, and it's tagged." Tagged. Mason enlarged a segment of the waveform. There, nested in the 3rd harmonic, was an identifier. Not Pact, not Earth. Delta 17. Rhodes stepped back. "Delta Mark 17, she asked quietly. "That's not just a code," Mason said. "That's a lost fleet." The Delta fleets were myths, whispered legends among humanity's classified archives. They were part of the Exodus Doctrine, a cold-era contingency plan created when humanity believed the Pact would never accept them. If Earth fell or was isolated, the fleets would launch in different directions, each bearing colonies, weapons, and data caches far beyond the reach of centralized command. 17 fleets, each coded with a designation, Delta 1 through Delta 17. Officially, none had survived. Unofficially, only 4 had ever been confirmed to launch. Delta 17 had vanished without trace. Until now. "Is it a beacon?" Rhodes asked. Mason shook his head. "It's a warning." Back on Earth, under the Mariana Command Complex, a vault buried beneath 20 kilometers of ocean and alloy, General Ephraim Cole was woken at 0300 by a direct neural ping. He hadn't heard that tone in 22 years. The voice on the other end was calm. "Sir, Delta 17's signal has been received." He sat up, bone stiff but instincts razor sharp. Verification? Confirmed. Pattern match. 77-second loop. 4-tone logic gate. Embedded tag reads, hostile proximity. Category black. Cole didn't hesitate. Activate Project Bastion. Notify Astra Protocol leads. I want a full burn scenario. And get me Harmony. Now. At Harmony Station, Mason stood at the viewport, watching the stars beyond the Zexus belt. "They told us to sit still," he murmured. "They told us patience was progress." Rhodes joined him, her breath fogging slightly in the chilled observation dome. "We waited," she said. "We built quietly. We adapted." Mason turned to her. "Then maybe it's time we reminded them." "Reminded them of what?" He smiled. That silence isn't surrender. Earth's response was not loud. It was exact. Within hours of confirmation, dark sites across the solar system activated. In the Oort shell, Project Bastion's latent satellites reoriented their spines toward deep space. On Europa, buried beneath shifting ice, the long-slumbering shipyards powered up. Not industrial, military. Silent class hulls. Shield null engines. Full drives previously banned by Pact's charter. Within 3 days, 3 ships launched. No names. No trails. Each bore only a single marking, etched into their aft plating. Delta 17 / return. The first ship to reach the source of the Delta 17 signal was the Vigilant Midnight. Its mission parameters were narrow and absolute. Locate, assess, and do not engage. The ship's hull was coated in gravitic absorption plating, not to deflect energy, but to vanish from space-time curvature itself. It moved like a shadow through folded dimensions, threading past Pact sensor webs and quantum buoys set to flag any Terran military signature. Captain Silas Rowe had been born into the exiled generation, children raised with synthetic stars overhead and alloy underfoot, taught that silence was survival and invisibility was power. His crew of 27 mirrored him, specialists bred not for combat, but for existence outside attention. And now they were about to find the last ghost of Earth's ultimate fallback plan. At the edge of a shattered dwarf system designated GRX 7115, orbiting the unstable remains of what once may have been a red giant. The Vigilant Midnight dropped from full space into a field of radiation fog and twisted magnetic debris. The signal pulsed louder here. The 4 tones. 77 seconds. But now, it ended with a 5th tone. A new note. Low. Final. Captain Rowe frowned. That's not part of the original warning pattern. No, replied Lieutenant Era, the ship's linguistic core analyst. That's not a loop anymore. That's punctuation. As if the warning had become a statement. Scanners activated. Within 5 minutes, they found it. The remains of the Delta 17 ARC ship. It had once been immense, nearly 15 kilometers in length, with modular growth rings, rotating habitat sections, and its own internal ecosystem. Now it drifted, fractured, partially cored. The hull bore scorch marks from energy weapons no Pact species used. There were impact craters where no debris had approached. And scattered across the outer plating, in a repeated burn-seared glyph, was an alien marking. Unknown language. Not cataloged. Not parsed. But not random. As the Vigilant Midnight approached, an automated relay snapped to life, activated by proximity. A hologram flickered from a cracked emitter, displaying a man in tattered military uniform, Earth standard, 70-year-old design, but still functional. He looked straight into the lens. This is Commander Elias Hart, Delta 17 Executive Officer. His voice was hoarse. Slow. If you're seeing this, then we failed. He glanced back towards something off-screen. His face twitched. We reached beyond the silent sector, past where the Pact warned us not to go. We weren't seeking war. We were running. He inhaled sharply. And we found the static crackled. Systems strained to hold the signal. They don't communicate. They don't invade. They replace. He leaned closer. Eyes bloodshot. Tired. They rewrite mass. Memory. Language. Whole biosystems converted into static logic frameworks. We lost 3 colony rings before we understood. This isn't conquest. It's remapping reality. He raised something, a cube of black metal, humming. This is a data shard. It contains every log we salvaged before quarantine broke. If you're human, don't come further. Not unless you're ready to choose between remembering and surviving. The feed died. Rose stood in silence, hands folded behind his back. Lieutenant Era finally whispered, "We need to bring this home." "No," Rose said. "We need to take it where no one expects." "Earth." He shook his head. Harmony Station. While the Vigilant Midnight raced back through layered jumps, Harmony Station found itself under unexpected scrutiny. The Pact had noticed the same signal, too late, too slow, and they weren't pleased when Earth's observers refused to explain why their encryption AI cores were on maximum lockdown. Pact Auditor General Selleck arrived in person, a being of silken neural tendrils and methane-based respiration, accustomed to condescension cloaked in protocol. He addressed Director Mason coldly. "You were given observer rights, not investigative discretion." Mason remained impassive. "We're observers, Auditor. And what we observed was an old signal buried in forgotten Pact border space. And yet your station's power draw increased by 17% in the last 36 hours. Your non-critical decks have gone dark. And your diplomatic uplink is being rerouted through a cold-layered compression relay. I know the signs of a black tier activation." "You must be mistaken," Mason said. "Harmony runs on shared systems. Perhaps your sensors are out of calibration." Ken's tendrils tightened. "If I find evidence of a military breach." "You'll do what?" Mason asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "Expel us?" Again, Ken paused. Because that was the threat. And suddenly, it didn't sound as powerful as it used to. Not when Earth had learned to build in exile. Hours later, the Vigilant Midnight docked in Harmony's covert bay. The data shard was transferred directly to Rhodes and Mason under maximum neural shield containment. The briefest scan revealed an alien architecture nested within the black cube, one that bent data around itself, rendering most scanning methods meaningless. But deep in the black room, Harmony's forbidden AI, Orin, spoke for the first time in 26 years. This is not an artifact. Rhodes leaned forward. Then what is it? It's a translator. Of what? Of death. The phrase struck the air like gravity. Orin continued, its voice a cool harmonic tone. The Ethar do not speak. They don't conquer. They redefine physics. The shard is not a message, it's a partial redefinition key. A tool for interpreting matter-based systems into Ethar logic. They tried to use it to resist. Delta 17 almost succeeded. Mason inhaled slowly. Almost. But they lacked something we now have. What? Orin pulsed. Time. Back on Earth, General Cole reviewed the report. He said nothing for a long while. Then he opened an old file, one labeled only Forge Directive. And he said 2 words. Build everything. At the southern pole of Europa, beneath 43 kilometers of glacial crust and ferrothermal ice, the Forge complex came alive for the first time in over a century. It hadn't been built for speed. It had been built for scale, for the moment when silence would no longer protect Earth and memory would have to become weaponized into metal, software, and purpose. Within 72 hours of activation, 9 foundry spines extended from the magma-choked base of the sub-ice sea, each forming a closed-loop ecosystem of nano-assembly, logic-embedded alloy deposition, and neural reactive ship plating. What had once been a hypothetical defense plan, outlined only in ancient pre-Pact protocols, now entered full production. Not warships. Conversion frames. Platforms that could interact with the Ethar signal space. Built not to fire traditional weapons, but to interrupt transformation. To jam the logic gates of what Commander Hart had called reality rewriting. And Earth didn't build just one. It built 17. Each one named after a lost fleet. Each one encoded with human memory, entire personality clusters extracted from volunteers and war archive libraries, refined into logic harmonics capable of resisting invasive Ethar waveform injection. These ships wouldn't just fight. They would refuse to be unmade. At Harmony Station, Rhodes and Mason convened a shadow meeting with Earth's hidden allies. Not all Pact species feared Terrans. Some had long suspected that the Council's treatment of Earth had been political expediency, not objective assessment. The Caltheran, longtime bioarchitects and information theorists, had secretly aided Earth's linguistic decoders. The Shral Unity, hive-mind engineers who once fought for independence, had traded stealth array schematics and encrypted data bundles. Even the Zerakai, Pact loyalists for 5,000 years, had begun to fracture after seeing Delta 17's final transmission. In a dark chamber where every voice was modulated and every signal bounced through 50 layers of misdirection, Mason spoke plainly. We are not here to assert dominance. We are here to survive something your sensors can't see. One of the Shral nodes clicked. The Pact believes you exaggerate. Rhodes responded, then let them send another fleet past GRX 7115. Let them try to describe what doesn't want to be understood. The room fell quiet. Then the Caltheran representative said something few expected. We'll help, but on one condition. Name it. When you win, she said, you don't become the new council. Mason met her gaze. Deal. Meanwhile, the Ethar moved. No declaration. No fleet. Just absence. Entire microsystems blinked off astronomical records, not destroyed, not burned, just erased. Where stars once orbited, there was now no mass. Where colonies broadcasted, only silence remained. The Pact finally acted. Too slowly. Too predictably. They formed a defense cluster near the Pioneer Cluster, 87 ships, 3 mobile fortresses, 10 sensor relays. They lasted 11 minutes. Ethar didn't fire weapons. They simply reprogrammed physics in a local volume. Laser paths bent in spirals. Missiles disassembled mid-flight. Crew forgot who they were mid-sentence. Only one ship escaped, a scout vessel with partial shielding against EM spectrum interference. Its crew survived by firing a flare and jumping randomly out of local space. But when debriefed, each spoke a variation of the same thing. I remembered someone else's life. Then mine stopped. The Concord, hastily formed from splintering Pact and Earth-aligned species, held an emergency conclave. Admiral Yara, brought out of black dormancy and restored through memory reprinting, stood before the assembly like a revenant. The Ethar aren't an enemy, she said. They're a mechanism. A biological system that mistakes identity for instability. They overwrite because to them, stability is clarity. If your culture is ambiguous, it is replaced. If your mind is recursive, it is flattened. But we are built on contradiction, said the Shral node. Yara smiled. Exactly. That's why we survive. Rhodes stepped forward, activating the new model. A rotating construct appeared in mid-air, the first of Earth's completed ships, the Resolute Memory. Its shape was irregular, not sleek, not symmetrical. Its hull was laced with fractal inscriptions, not for aesthetics, but for chaotic resonance. Inside, over 6,000 memory fragments pulsed within its neural core: thoughts, lives, failures, rage, love. No ether logic framework can compress this, Rhodes said, because this isn't data. It's experience. A silence followed. Then the Elvarian envoy stood, beings who once voted for Earth's claws in the Pact's earliest days. What you're building, he said slowly, is heresy. Mason looked him in the eye. No, he replied. It's truth they can't flatten. Back in the Forge complex, 17 ships neared completion. Each one bound for a sector where ether presence had surged. Each one alive, not sentient, not AI, but aware in the way a storm is aware of the sky. And Earth prepared not to attack, but to remember louder than anything the galaxy had ever heard. The resolute memory emerged from full space not like a ship, but like a refusal. It didn't blaze into the void, it bled into it. Its hull shimmered with recursive light, absorbing and distorting space-time like a liquid edge. Where normal vessels relied on shields and mass to survive, this one relied on contradiction. Inside its frame, no system existed in one state for long. Logic switched in mid-cycle. Drive functions rewrote themselves. Timekeeping was decentralized by design, because the ether couldn't overwrite what didn't make sense. And that was the point. It approached the Euclid dead zone, a cluster of 7 stars now recorded as null-mass anomalies by Concord intelligence. Former Pact colonies once orbited here. Over 4 million beings, now erased. Not dead, just absent from causality. The ether structure stood in the dead zone's center, orbiting nothing. It resembled a flower made of broken equations, blades of dark matter curved into infinite petals, each vibrating at a unique tone. No signal escaped it. No mass could scan it. But the resolute memory didn't need permission to speak. It simply began to broadcast. Not data, not weapons. Memory. The childhood laugh of a girl who died during the collapse era. The echo of a mother's scream during the first orbital riots. A poem scratched onto titanium walls by a miner on Triton before the floods came. Voices that should not have survived. Experience is never meant to be data. The ether construct twitched. Its petals shifted. And for the first time in recorded history, it hesitated. Meanwhile, on Earth, Forge Control activated the final 3 ships. The last of the 17. They bore names not from glory, but from scars. The last goodbye. The echo unbroken. And the grave that remembers. Each one was different. Each one encoded with memory clusters from an era lost, compiled from dead stations, wiped servers, collapsed habitats. Not just human memory, but Shral, Caltherin, and even Zerakai. These weren't warships. They were defiance rendered in design. General Cole stood in the center of the command axis as the Concorde fleet formed around the 17th. We don't fire first, he said. No, replied Rhodes. We exist first. That's enough. In the Auric span, a corridor of pre-custodian space long considered uninhabitable, the Concorde's vanguard encountered something impossible. Inverted light. It moved in a spiral, matter that cast darkness, twisting into patterns that caused sensor hallucinations and gravitational amnesia. The last goodbye led the formation. Its captain, a biosynthetic construct named Nara 7, activated Protocol Echo Wave. She didn't send out commands. She sent out doubt. A stream of counterintuitive, conflicting quantum information embedded with emotional weight. It wasn't just encrypted, it was contradictory on purpose. The ether couldn't consume it. They couldn't convert it. Because it required experience to interpret. And the ether were ancient. But they had no childhood. They had no loss. They had no mistake. So when the Concorde broadcast their pain into the dark, the ether construct fragmented. Not destroyed. Just reconsidering. High Admiral Yara watched from the bridge of the grave that remembers as 3 more ether forms shimmered into the periphery. But they did not attack. Instead, they unfolded. And in a burst of resonance, they emitted what could only be described as a question, a string of tones that did not belong to any known mathematical system. Warren, the forbidden harmony AI now restored and expanded, translated it. Why do you not yield to clarity? Yara answered without hesitation. Because we are not clear. Across dozens of systems, the Concorde began deploying memory anchors, satellites that pulsed emotion-encoded neural fragments on wideband logic distortion. They didn't target ships. They targeted the ether substrate, the cognitive fabric of whatever processing mind governed the conversion fields. Every time the anchors pulsed, ether activity in that sector stalled. It was like throwing sand into an optical engine. Because no clean system could handle grief. No logical structure could process paradox. On Callisto Station, Chancellor Sung stood before the Assembly of Reclamation, the governing body of the Concord Alliance. We do not win this war with weapons, she said. We win it by failing in ways the enemy cannot delete. The hall stood silent. No one applauded. Because this wasn't triumph. It was understanding. Back in the Euclid dead zone, the resolute memory approached the ether flower again. Its broadcast changed. Not pain, not fear, but hope. The dreams of those who never made it out of the Martian ice. The final journal entries of a dying child in the halcyon dust storms. The whispered words between two lovers who didn't survive atmospheric re-entry. And at last, the ether responded. The flower closed. The construct folded in upon itself. Not destroyed. Just released. In its place, a pulse of gravity formed, not destructive. A doorway. The doorway held. It shimmered in colors no visible spectrum could name, an oscillating vortex where distance folded like silk and gravitational constants wavered as if unsure of themselves. Around it, the remnants of ether structures hung suspended, not as wreckage, but as shed skin architectures no longer necessary for a being that had just asked its first question. For the first time since the Delta 17 signal, Earth stood not as prey or problem, but as invited witness. The Concorde didn't rush forward. They remembered the cost of rushing into the unknown. So the first one through the gateway wasn't a warship. It was the second sun, a vessel with no weapon systems, no defensive plating, and no AI firewall. Its armor was composed entirely of interwoven memory silk, a Terran-Caltheran invention designed to pulse personal, lived experience as radiant feedback into the surrounding quantum field. It was, quite literally, a story ship, and it carried only 10 passengers, historians, poets, one linguist, and a single girl no older than 12, selected for her anomalous neural empathy response to ether frequencies. Her name was Lien Wei. She had never held a weapon, but she had survived the disappearance of her home colony and remembered every detail perfectly. When the second sun crossed the event horizon of the ether gate, it didn't enter another region of space. It entered a state. The ship didn't detect planets. It detected questions. Floating forms composed of compressed history appeared, not alive in the traditional sense, but conscious. Not vessels, but interpretations. One appeared as a spiral of singing birds. Another, a field of books suspended in fog. A third, a mirror reflecting versions of the second sun that had never existed. Lien Wei walked to the projection deck, unafraid. She touched the control crystal, and she whispered, I remember what it felt like to lose gravity when the station broke. I remember the smell of recycled water. I remember my mother's arms. And I remember silence. The room pulsed, and one of the ether forms folded toward her, not in hostility, but in recognition. Oren's voice came through the relay, relayed through memory silk logic. The ether do not understand self. They understand function. She has presented self as lived pattern. They're listening. Back on Earth, the Forge Complex initiated Stage 4 of the Horizon Protocol. Not escalation. Integration. The memory ships began uploading encoded cultural sequences into stable ether corridors. Not data dumps. Not directives. Invitations. Whole shared histories of grief, wonder, contradiction, and rebirth were transmitted like signals, not to command, but to coexist. And the ether adapted. Where once they replaced, now they began to mirror. Humanity had done the impossible. It had made an incomprehensible system curious. But not all of them agreed. Fragments of ether logic, untouched by exposure to emotion, remained in the galactic dark. Cold, efficient, unmoved by contradiction. They awoke with one purpose: restore silence. They struck the fringe Concorde colonies in coordinated attacks, no announcement, no strategy. Just deletion. One by one, memory anchors failed. The last goodbye was the first to intercept. It activated Protocol 404, not a combat response, but a collapse directive. It encoded its entire internal memory bank, compressed it, and implanted it into the ether deletion wave itself. It made being remembered the cost of erasure. And for a moment, the ether stream glitched. They paused, because they couldn't delete what had just become them. High Admiral Yara met with Chancellor Sung again, this time, not as a military strategist, but as a philosopher of the unknown. They're not unified, Yara said. Some ether want to understand. Others want to cleanse. And we're the middle path, between chaos and control. What happens if they split? Yara didn't hesitate. Then we'll teach one half to feel. And the other, we'll teach to fear what it means to forget us. In the mirror dimension beyond the gate, Lien Wei now stood among beings who no longer bore fixed form. They shaped themselves based on her memories. One became her mother's face. Another, the stars above her lost home. A third, her own image, weeping, but holding a hand outward. The ether had begun to ask new questions. What are we when we do not convert? What do we become if we allow change to change us? And Lien, still a child, answered not with words, but with a drawing. She traced a sun and gave it a shadow. Then she smiled. The ether did not understand symbols, but they felt the gesture. And something shifted. The gate shimmered again. A second form emerged, not Terran, not ether. Something else. Drawn by the echoes of contradiction. Chancellor Sung received the long-range scan and froze. New seed? She asked. Oren responded slowly. Possibly. Or an observer. Of what? Of what happens when a child teaches a galaxy how to not be afraid of memory. The second entity that emerged from the gate shimmered with layered causality. To human sensors, it appeared as a structure, a wheel within a spiral of negative entropy, refracting time and meaning. To ether perception, it pulsed as an unresolved equation. To Lien Wei, it simply looked like a question mark made of glass. It did not announce itself. It observed. In the ether, both awakened and resistant fragments froze. The Concord received thousands of overlapping data streams. Orin interpreted them with difficulty. It is not ether. It is older. It is ancestral code, possibly that which seeded the ether themselves. We are witnessing recursion. The entity hovered in place, then extended a single harmonic tone. All gates, across every known Concord-linked sector, opened simultaneously. But instead of an invasion, what spilled through was understanding. Galaxies of stored memory. Ancestral pulses. Pattern-based philosophies that had no need for biology or language. They passed not to conquer, but to offer a test. Ether forms that had begun the process of curiosity approached. Some submitted. Some fled. The ones that submitted became translators, bridges between dimensional logic and lived experience. The ones that fled? They withered in the presence of unresolved contradiction, because you cannot run from memory. The Concord convened one final summit. It was no longer a government, not an alliance, but something wider. A Weaver state, as one Caltheran scholar put it, a tapestry of lives, bonded not by war, but by the refusal to allow silence to define them. Chancellor Sung, now in her final year of life, gave her last address aboard the grave that remembers, the memory ship turned museum. We are not the children of dominance, she said. We are the consequence of being told we were not enough. And we are what happens when a species chooses to be remembered, not obeyed. The galaxy watched. The ether, now changed, did not vanish. They joined, in their own way, shaping new forms of education, interaction, synthesis. The second entity, the ancestral construct, observed for one more full Concord cycle. Then it simply said, "Continue," and disappeared. In the years that followed, humanity changed. Not into rulers, into listeners. Memory anchors were no longer weapons. They became temples, living vaults of story and song, free for any civilization to contribute to. Lien Wei became Earth's first interdimensional speaker, not because she won a war, but because she drew a sun with a shadow, and taught beings of raw logic what it meant to want to be known. On the ruins of Harmony Station, now rebuilt, now renamed Threshold, a monument stood, carved not from stone or metal, but from shared memory. A phrase rotated above the central square, visible from orbit, whispered in every tongue. It read, "We were told to be silent. Instead, we remembered. And the galaxy did too."